the poison trick. It's something we've talked about several times before on this channel, but today I want to look at how pro players have taken to dealing with this deadly strategy. To recap for those of you who may not know, the poison trick involves using the poison gas from the scout class in multiplayer and, well, as you've guessed it, poisoning your opponent's pig. Pro players are always on the lookout for pigs that have between 16 to 25 health, as the initial 15 damage from the impact of the gas will drop the pig's health down to 10 or less, resulting in a possible turn gained once that pig then dies. In competitive Hogs of War, it's become crucial on certain maps to have a scout, particularly those maps that offer environmental areas where chaining hits with the poison gas are made possible. I'm talking about maps like P-Drag, Pitch Invasion, Hedge Maze upstream, and even Square Off. Essentially any flat area is prime real estate for scouts. As we've seen countless times in competitive matches, this can become an overwhelming advantage if not dealt with properly. So how exactly do you deal with the threat of losing those precious turns? Well, if you find yourself in that situation where your own pig has between 16 and 25 HP, there is one thing on the map you need to look for, and it's not health crates, it's water. If the looming threat of being poisoned is near, competitive players will deliberately look for water in order to drop their health pig deliberately down to 15 HP or less, thus removing the threat of losing a turn. In doing so, that pig has now just become another low health enemy that those opponents will then need to deal with. As we've touched on before in my previous video on this subject, we all know how important low health pigs can be in competitive matches. Okay, but what happens if you happen to be playing on a map that doesn't have any water? Well, okay, that's when your attention will then switch to that of health crates, but if there are no health crates, then you can look at two things. The first is the head jump strategy. It's a tactic we've seen many times before, whereby you use one of your other pigs to jump on the head of that low health pig in order to drop its health down by 1 HP with each jump. The major downside, of course, is that it can be very time consuming, especially when playing in the Pro League where the timer is set to 30 seconds per turn by default. I would only recommend using the head jump strat if your pig is on 16 or 17 HP. Very specific, I know, but I feel like 2 head jumps are the max you should perform if you want to comfortably use the rest of your turn to then go and inflict damage onto your opponent's pigs. But players in the Grunt League may also be able to get away with more head jumps given how the timer by default in that league is set to 45 seconds rather than 30. The second strategy is the Jetpack tactic. Now this obviously requires a paratrooper in your lineup who essentially inflicts damage onto that pig in order to lower his health and avoid being poisoned. A direct hit from the jetpack results in 20 HP's worth of damage, so it can be tricky to pull off this strat if you're looking to deal anything less than that. We're talking about very fine margins for error here. The head jump is all about timing, while the jetpack strat requires precision accuracy in order to be pulled off correctly. Of course, like everything in this game, every tactic and strategy is situational. If you find yourself on a map that has no water, your opponents definitely have a good scout in their lineup and your medic is either dead or nowhere to be seen, sometimes it might be more effective to damage or even kill your pig that could lose a turn if they are poisoned by the enemy. This is obviously a last resort type of situation, one where you must consider another two things beforehand. Number one, what class is it that I'm using that is about to be poisoned? And number two, is there any other strategy I have not yet or currently used that could change my opponent's mind in using the poison gas against me? I am of course talking about the use of body blocking here, but let's go back to point number one first. Going full kamikaze to avoid being poisoned should only be a last resort if you're using a class that can inflict a large amount of damage with their final turn. The likes of the Grenadier and Sapper come to mind here, especially when the kamikaze is done properly. Rather than saying to yourself, okay, I'll just use this cluster bomb or shrapnel grenade and throw it at my opponent's pig and make sure that they are damaged and that my pig is as well, think about where your pig is positioned when you use the weapon and whether it's possible to deal even more damage from your own pig's death. You want to, both literally and figuratively, go out with a bang. But again, I stress the use of this being a last resort because if we look at point number two more closely, we will see how body blocking can be used to counter the threat of the poison trick. So let's say for example you're about to take your turn with a Grenadier. You have 18 health, which is perfect for your opponent, whose next turn will be taken by their scout who just so happens to be within range of your position. There's no water on the map, your medic is locked in some MoMA action. What do you do? Well, first things first, you observe any enemy pig around you who could potentially become a body block. Once you spot one, you limp up to the pig and stand as close to him as you can. Wonderful, you have just performed a successful body block, but the next two things you need to think about in that instance, in that second, are about how much of your own turn is left, and if you have time, is there any other enemy pigs around you that can be targeted by your weaponry that has range in order to, then deal damage onto your opponent. If there isn't any time, then it's not the end of the world, because the point I'm trying to make here is that the damage aspect of your turn in that instance is secondary. What's most important in that scenario is that you've just called your opponent's bluff. You know what they're thinking in that moment, and you've basically just said,
yeah, well, if you're going to poison me, then you also just risked poisoning your own pig.
This is doubly beneficial if the pig that you have just body blocked also happens to be on low health, but again, this is very situational. The next turn for your opponent then becomes very tricky, as depending on how close you have positioned the body block, it is still possible for them to poison you without inflicting damage onto their own pig, so do keep that in mind when going for this strategy. If they do still go for the poison in that instance, then that's where you eventually use your next few turns to try and inflict damage onto that area in order to kill your own pig and avoid losing a turn, but also still trying to dish out damage to any opponents that are in that area. It's difficult to analyze and predict specific instances of certain situations in Hogs because there are just so many things to consider within any given turn. Health, positioning, damage numbers, team composition, turn order, all of these factors barely scratch the surface of the complexities of competitive Hogs, but it's why we love playing it. I hope this video has been helpful to some of you, particularly those of you who have just started in the Grunt League. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts on these strategies and tactics in the comments. If you think I've missed out any of them in regards to the poison trick, then do let me know as well. Let's get a discussion going as we always do, and in the meantime, I will catch you all later for the next one.